that term could not be observed. Due to the constitution, we should have the elections in the period between 100 or 75 days before the end of the present term of the president's first term. And it is physically impossible now. So we have no new term, new concrete day named by the responsible for that authorities, but probably it will be on June 28. The political scene is deeply divided. We have the present president as the most important candidate, which I think is usual each time when the head of the state is running for re-election. It has some kind of privileges, political one, in that sense that he's well known to the public. The other candidates are of a different political popularity in the public opinion. The civic platform that postponed effectively the elections took the advantage and changed the candidate, since the previous one was or proved to be extremely unpopular in the polls. But please remember that, truly speaking, the polls in Poland are much more an instrument for shaping the public opinion than to study public opinion. So that is another part of reality. In fact, we don't know what is the real public support. Nevertheless, of course, it's not completely not important what the polls show to us. So the main assessment is that probably this split of the electorate between the supporters of the ruling camp and the opponents is, of course, the most important one. And the real question is which of the oppositional candidates, which one is able to gather the support of all the other electorates in the second term, if we have the second term in these elections. What is the real political goal of the oppositional parties? In my opinion, it's highly improbable for the present president to lose those elections. So the real political goal for the oppositional parties is to win for this or that party the title of the most important, if I can say like that, anti-peace. That means the leading party of the opposition, who is the future center of consolidation of the opposition against the ruling camp. And at the beginning, the favorite party was Civic Platform. Then, after the failure of the Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska attempt to be the leader of the competition, a new leader emerged for a while. That was Szymon Hołownia, who is not a representative of, officially at least, of any party. And now Civic Platform seems to regain that position of the leading anti-peace force at the cost of the so-called left party, which is a combination of the former post-communist and the call it new modern progressive leftist circles concentrated on such topics as well, abortion or LGBT or the things like that. Yeah? So the other candidate, quite important in my opinion, is the leader of the so-called Peasant Party. That is again the former, at that time called the Ally Party of the Communist Party, then renamed to the new name. This is the only candidate that has at its disposal a relatively traditionally minded rural electorate, which means that if he's supported, if he's in the second term, he could be supported by all the others as the main competitor to the present president, while not losing that traditional electorate that will not be for sure taken by Rafał Trzaskowski, who is clearly identified as a person connected to this political line, which is symbolized by, shortly speaking, abortion, LGBT, and so on. So the real competition, in my opinion, is not about who wins the elections, because, of course, everything is possible in politics. Still, I would be surprised if there is a change in Poland this time, while the competition is who will be the second, who will be the main consolidator of the opposition as the competitor of President Duda in the second term. And I think that from the ruling camp point of view, the situation is quite good. That means probably this competitor will be Rafał Trzaskowski, who is not able to consolidate the entire electorate due to that traditional part of it, which will never support his ideas, while the best scenario from the ruling camp of view, point of view, the scenario with Hołownia as the second best is less and less possible after the change of the candidate of Civic Platform. So this is the internal Polish situation. However, the situation is dynamic. I'm not completely convinced whether the latest information, the latest news about the possible second change of the candidate of Civic Platform is true, whether it's a part of political game between the parties to discredit the candidate, or it's the outcome of the internal struggle within the Civic Platform, because please remember that Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska was emerged as a candidate in the procedure of primaries, the pre-elections in the Civic Platform, while Rafał Trzaskowski was just nominated by the leader of the party. So I cannot exclude the internal tensions within this political formation, but I'm not an expert on internal struggle within the Civic Platform, so I don't know what is really and what is reality. Nevertheless, from my point of view, it would be highly unlogical to change the candidate again during the same elections. However, on the other side, to finalize the legal procedures, to have the new electoral rules finally established, we need the decision of Senate, and it is still postponed by the Civic Platform for the unknown reasons. So this must be explained because it's contrary to its own interest. I mean, the later the decision is taken by the Senate, dominated by the opposition, the shorter is the time to collect the signatures of the citizens to support the new candidate. So in fact, they are playing against their own interest. Why? It's an interesting question. Let me add another external element to the situation, which is rather ignored in the Polish internal debate. That means the background in the European Union. The background in the European Union, in my opinion, the most important one, is the debate about the future budget of the European Union of the years 21-27 in the context of the coronavirus financial dimension challenge, which of course is the main challenge for today for the entire Europe. And I think this serves for the separate debate. We have no time to describe all the problems in that dimension, but it is very important. But I think it's worth stressing that completely absent in Polish debate at least now. Maybe it will be next weeks, but today it's completely ignored.
Okay.
Short.
Okay, thank you. That was for the first round. I have a lot of questions in my mind, but I will follow it later. I would like to ask Maria to continue with your introduction from your perspective.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to take part in this very exciting debate. I will talk a little bit about a European perspective, but before I do that, I looked at our invitation and I was very much intrigued by the idea of a coronavirus, the outbreak of COVID-19 being a game changer in Poland. And I was thinking, is it really a game changer, or is it really a situation that exposes issues, that is a test for strengths and weaknesses for various political actors? And I will perhaps start with this, that I see it more like this, as this latter case. So the coronavirus is not really changing much in the political landscape of Poland, but rather testing the capacities of the political actors there. And I think in the presidential campaign, it has proven that the incumbent president is not as strong candidate probably as he would wish for. He is, of course, leading in the polls. However, his popularity has been dropping in the recent weeks. He's been also criticized by other counter candidates for running pretty active campaign. Of course, the incumbency comes with a certain sort of advantage. He's still in the office. He has to be active in the office. However, his counter candidates were accusing him of misusing that opportunity, and he even was nicknamed a Corona candidate. And I think this whole situation with hectic movements around the elections of with passing the bill or not passing the bill, with preparation for a postal vote, all these very chaotic circumstances that preceded the non-elections on the 10th of May have weakened his position. And I think it brings me to the second point, that the outbreak of COVID and its interference with the planned presidential election also proves how vulnerable the governing coalition is. As I mentioned, and it was mentioned by my predecessor, by the previous speaker, the elections were supposed to take place in a postal way. Well, in the end, it didn't take place. I'm not claiming it's easy to face a situation where a presidential general election is coming, and then you're surprised by a epidemic. However, this dramatic attempt to still have it in the original initial date on the May of 10th, and this determination of, in particular, I think the Law and Justice and Jarosław Kaczyński to push it through whatever it takes, has proven some anxiety and insecurity about the outcome of this election, and the insecurity about the popularity of the incumbent president, Andrzej Duda. In the end, the fate of this election was decided in a political negotiation between the governing party and its junior coalition partner. So if you look at in a more nuanced way and the political situation or the dynamics within the governing coalition in Poland, you can see there is a certain nervousness and not too much security, and it's not for granted that Andrzej Duda will win the re-election. And that brings me to my third point regarding the impact of COVID on the moods in the country. I think looking from the perspective of a society, I think there is a certain fatigue or within the Polish society, fatigue with the political scene, with political actors. yes, Andrzej Duda is leading in the polls. However, if we look at those opinion polls right now, it's not sure he would, not sure at all he would win in the first round. There's no clear leader, a champion of that race right now. And there is a variety of candidates, but none of them is bound to win. I think also what is interesting, and Szymon Hołownia was already mentioned before, Szymon Hołownia is a TV celebrity, TV personality of a very clear Christian character, so to speak. He's very open about his faith, and he presents himself as a beyond establishment candidate, and I'd like to stress that, not anti-establishment, but beyond establishment. He has that embracing narrative, let's come together, kind of like a Biden narrative, let's come together and overcome the differences. And let's make a change in this country. And he's gaining traction. He's like a dark horse of this election. At least he was short before May 10th. He was said to be probably has the biggest chance to challenge the incumbent president. And I think it shows that some people in the country are looking for alternatives, for fresh faces. So I would see the current mood in Poland like this, in that. More or less like that. And why I'm mentioning it, and now I will embark more on the European perspective. First of all, you know, Poland is, the situation in Poland is very tense, and the Polish society is divided. There are deep cleavages between the governing, the supporters of the governing formation and the opposition, in particular the civic platform and the circles around it, but and also the governing formation cannot be too sure of the outcome of this presidential election. And here, please remember, Poland is not Hungary, and both countries are very often put together and listed together with the one breath, but the situation in Poland is, I think, a bit different, and the future of this government or this political formation in power is perhaps not as sure as in Hungary. And what that means to Europe, for Europe, well, depending who will be the next candidate, of course, we will have the next president, sorry, we will have different scenarios. And if I were to sketch some of them, I would really skip funny candidates like the far right or populists, and I would only focus on the most relevant ones, which I would say is the Robert Biedroń, the candidate of the left, who, in my opinion, is the most European of all candidates. He's not very convinced of the importance of European integration, but also very convinced of the European values, not only economic integration, but also integration and political integration in terms of, and also in terms of norms and what we understand as a Europe of civic liberties, equality, diversity. He is, however, he was a hope to many people. However, right now he's lost traction. Then, if I would be looking at the center right or liberal conservative candidates here, we have probably Trzaskowski and representing the Civic Platform, the new candidate of the Civic Platform, and Kosiniak-Kamysz, who is representing the Agrarian Party. They both belong to the family of the EPP, the European People's Party group at the European Parliament. So one can also expect their positive approach to the EU as it is now. And I would expect, however, that should Mr. Trzaskowski be successful in this race, I would think the situation between the presidential palace and Sejm in Poland would be far more fierce and antagonized. And this internal friction between these two centers of powers in Poland would have and would affect Poland's communication with the EU. And I would also think that Szymon Hołownia is a pro-European candidate. However, he is the candidate with least political experience, so that's perhaps not fortunate for a presidential candidate that already has to start with a certain sort of experience and understanding of international issues. The question is how much and to which extent he would be dependent on his advisors. And last but not least, I will finish with the incumbent president and the scenario that he will be re-elected, which is possible, and there is a chance for it. And here I wouldn't see any changes. I mean, the incumbent president is supported by the United Right. It is the candidate of the governing party and its junior coalition partners. So he runs policies that are in line with the politics and policies preferred by the governing party in Poland. And here, as well, you're all very familiar with the conflict or certain aggravations of relations between the Polish government and the European Union over the controversial judiciary reforms, over the issues with public media. So here, I would say not much would change in that respect. Just a brief remark, like a few weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, President Duda was trying to take that statesman's role, and he published he sent an open letter to European leaders outlining 5 points how to overcome the crisis. He was trying to take a proactive role as some kind of a constructive role, but as far as I saw, this letter went pretty unnoticed. Now, what is really on the mouth of everybody, what is talked about, is the idea of Merkel and Macron, the recovery plan for Europe. So I'm mentioning it because I don't think that the incumbent president of Poland is seen in Poland, in Europe, as a statesman, as a proactive politician. And I think, and this is pretty normal, he is the candidate of the governing party. He's somehow interconnected with the actual authorities of Poland. So I wouldn't expect a sudden turn in those relations between the Republic of Poland and the EU should he be re-elected. And I'll stop here with looking at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So we immediately come to Philipp Fritz, and I would like to ask you to continue.
Thank you. First of all, can you hear me? Is my microphone on? Okay, yes. Fantastic. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to take part in this exciting discussion. I'm a little afraid now to repeat what Maria Skóra and Przemyslaw Zurawski have said already, so I will just briefly outline or ask the question, what's new related to the non-elections on May 10th. And I think that first, to add something to what Przemyslaw Zurawski said, this might not just be the beginning of a new opposition. We may be going to see an opposition uniting or reuniting behind a candidate like Rafał Trzaskowski. Doesn't matter if he's going to be Poland's next president or not. But we'll be, or I think that the non-elections of May 10th were the beginning of a new peace, maybe. I mean, which is to say, I mean, this is not the end of peace, but for the first time, the party leadership, which actually has fantastic political instincts, first and foremost, Jarosław Kaczyński himself, made a decision opposing the majority of the Polish population. I think the party leadership underestimated to what extent most Poles were afraid because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And all the constitutional chaos related to May 10th and the fact that peace been pushing forward that date, and to a certain extent even a state crisis, led to some sort of peace fatigue. So the party will have to change internally. I mean, it's power dynamics, or the government will have to change. And the struggle with Jarosław Gowin is a second thing that is related to that. That has shown us, especially as foreign commentators or correspondents dealing with Poland, that of course Jarosław Kaczyński is an unusually powerful politician, but he is not almighty. So the struggle with Gowin has exposed kind of power politics within the party, which is another interesting fact. So those are my two cents to what you guys have said. I would like to say something more about Rafał Trzaskowski, who to me is an interesting choice. He might be for PO the smartest and the dumbest choice at the same time, because he is most likely one of the most talented Polish politicians at the moment, and which might be a liability, right? I mean, he's not the guy that's going to be elected by Polish swing voters on the countryside, but he might give the PO campaign a certain push forward. So it's very, very hard to predict what's going to be the outcome of his nomination. But anyhow, I think if it doesn't matter if Trzaskowski or Kosiniak-Kamysz or Hołownia is going to make it to the second round, it might be tough, might be a tough deal for Duda. So those elections going to be really, really exciting, and that was something that wasn't foreseeable by the beginning of May. So I'm quite excited to watch Polish elections, most likely by the end of June. So this is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for you and for all three of you. I would like to start with a question, and I think because it was not mentioned, and that the cancelling the election was so very short before the election. So I got the impression that even that it was clear before that the election, presidential election in the 10th of May would be free, but not really fair, because for the other candidates, it was impossible to have an election campaign. But it seemed that that doesn't matter in anything. And PiS wanted in every case to do it. And only the resistance of Gowin stopped it and brought it that we got a new round. And so my question is it the old experience that the game of power is neglecting all these questions of political culture? What about, is there no fear that the next President Duda, elected under such conditions, would suffer on a deficit of legitimacy? Because it's just done under these conditions. I would like to ask you later, after some different more questions or remarks, you respond to this of my question. Who would like to start with and to follow with own questions or remarks? Adam, do you have to, can you see? I can't see. Who would like?
Yes, I still see no questions, so maybe we could go ahead with the reactions to Markus' remarks. And as I said, I would like to encourage you to ask your question by using the raise your hand button, or you could also use the chat window to make yourself visible if you want to ask a question or share a comment.
Okay, so I agree that if there's no hand in this moment, I would like to ask the question, who of you would like to respond to my question at first?
I would like.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so first, I can't see any reason to say that there was no normal condition to conduct the, well, normal in the context of coronavirus, of course, to conduct the electoral campaign for all of the candidates. Nobody was able to have the electoral meetings in the sense of the crowd of people to address. But of course, all the electronic media were still functioning. So in that dimension, the other candidates could communicate with the electorate more or less in the same way. The other, and I think the most important issue, because this is one of the detailed questions. The most important issue are political goals, and your question about the expected legitimacy of the future president if elected in this kind of conditions. So I have to stress that whatever will be the campaign and the procedures, the president, if is re-elected, will not be recognized by the opposition. That was the case in 2015. And the deepness of the split in Poland is so great that it is not important what will be the procedures from the point of view whether the future president will be perceived by the opposition as the legal one or as the one that was elected with some kind of legal mistakes, yeah, or other lack of procedures. So the most characteristic of the Polish political scene is that both camps are deeply entrenched, and all the arguments we have heard are very convincing by it for the people for this or for that camp. There is no substantial flow of electorate between the two camps. So the real question is, for example, what Mrs. Maria Skora said about Biedroń. His electorate is now being consumed by Trzaskowski due to the similarity of the candidates. But this is not an added value to the oppositional camp. And so the flow is between Biedroń and between Trzaskowski, but not between Duda and Trzaskowski. Trzaskowski as a leader, in my opinion, is not important for the long term. That is, he's not a leader of the civic platform, and nobody knows who will be in the next months. What is important is whether he's able or not to win for the civic platform the title, or rather to maintain the title of the leading oppositional force, or whether that title will be lost for the other party. And I think that the change of the candidate helped the civic platform to maintain that title, because it was threatened by Hołownia, that would profit no party, or by Kosiniak-Kamysz, who in my opinion is the most dangerous competitor. Still, please remember that even in the worst polls, the present president had about 42%, while Trzaskowski 20-24, the others rather less than 10%. So this is the reality. Yeah, we can have the rise of the popularity of this or that candidate, but not by 20%, of course. Yeah. So the real question is who will take the electorate of the others in the second term, if we have second term. And this question, the answer to that question is that the only candidate, in my opinion, that can take the electorate of the others is Kosiniak-Kamysz, while it is not Trzaskowski. He will not take the traditional electorate, rural electorate. As far as the May the 10th elections are concerned, and that
maybe we could stop here because we have another question. We have a question.
Just one sentence. Please distinguish between great cities and rural electorate. Rural electorate was not that afraid of the coronavirus threat because simply everybody knows, everybody in small communities and that threat of pandemic is much more influential on the moods of electorates in the cities than in rural areas, while from technical point of view, that is a weakness of the ruling party because of the fact that rural electorate is its electorate. So the main problem is how to mobilize it and not how to convince it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have Zsuzsanna Szelenyi with a comment or question. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I am Zsuzsanna Szelenyi from Hungary and a Robert Bosch Fellow in Berlin at the moment. I'm a former Hungarian politician. But thank you very much. It was really interesting how you mapped the Polish political landscape at the moment, which is really very much in the forefront of also Hungarian perspective. You described this very struggling political field where nothing is really clear and when the government is not really strong. Duda is losing popularity, but the opposition is also rather weak. There is no kind of striking politician coming out. So of course we know this situation very well from Hungary when nothing is really moving or just there are little movements and it's basically there are no big moves coming ahead. And I think it's very typical for our times. What you described and what's very interesting in how the opposition itself is fragmented, struggling, which is completely normal. We always forget that that's the normal state of politics, that political parties also who are in opposition are struggling against each other. But of course, the presidential election is different from parliamentary because some kind of coalition buildings are not so easy. You have to, at the end of the day, stand behind one person in order, if the goal is to change the status quo. So, and you told all kind of strengths and weaknesses of the various candidates. What no one spoke about is any story these candidates would come up with. So, and I think also in Poland, it's very, very important that that there is a critical mass of people who is backing a candidate. And because the country is so divided between cities and rural areas, this storytelling is something very important. So my question is is there any political story by any of the candidates? Well, I'm not so much interested in now Duda, but the others, which actually would go for a critical mass beyond their own well-known supporters. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria, would you like to answer at
Surely.
first?
Yeah, surely. Thank you. It's a very interesting question, and especially one senses the perspective of a ex-politician and the campaigning experience. Of course, there has to be a story, and to get to the electorate you really want to reach out to. And so we've touched upon it a little bit before, but yes, of course, each candidate has their story. And I would say the main story of the incumbent president is to keep what the Law and Justice has been doing in Poland for the last years, especially here, the importance and the impact of generous social policy programs is highlighted. And this is a recurring motive in many campaigns, even in the European campaign, this was coming back, that if we lose child support and whatnot, will be lost as well. I would say at the end of a civic platform, there indeed is this very strong anti-law and justice agenda, and let's come back to what was, and there really is a really strong competition between the two. I think the embracing narratives come from really Robert Biedroń and from Hołownia that I mentioned, which is a beyond establishment candidate. But Robert Biedroń was really the candidate of the left. He was representing the narrative of let's cross and step beyond exactly this division between urban and rural areas. Let's not only think about the electorate in big cities, but also reach out to people in smaller towns, smaller places that are facing challenges that are maybe not developing that fast, that would normally choose law and justice instead of the liberals or the civic platform. And Robert Biedroń had also that coming together narrative. But having said all that, I think the most important feature of our societies, be it Hungary and Poland, is that we still have a gigantic chunk of electorate of non-voters. And the question is how to reach to these people. In Poland, it's the voter turnout is usually around 60–65%. So there is still quite a big part of the society which is disinterested or disenchanted by politics, and perhaps it would be interesting to know how to reach out to them. And it's also kind of typical for East Germany, for example. And unfortunately, these non-voters are easily triggered by populist slogans, be it the AfD or like last elections, the cookies movement was also pretty popular with people who were not voting for years and decided to go for anti-establishment actors. So the question is how to activate people and activate citizenship to make them exercise their active voting right and exercise it in a constructive way. I think this is also an interesting part of the campaigning.
Thank you. Professor Zurawski, what you wanted to respond to? Not so
Maybe
long.
Just wait a second. We have another question. We have before we go to the reaction. I would suggest we take another question from Vít Dostal.
Let me continue in that way. What I said that Professor Zurawski can shortly answer, and then we go to the next. Professor Zurawski?
Okay. Yeah. Well, we should add some facts. First, Robert Biedroń now enjoys about 3% of support, which is the result of the flow of electorate to Trzaskowski. Both the candidates have the experience, well known in Poland, of being the presidents of the city, Trzaskowski of Warsaw and Biedroń of Słupsk, which is not a success story, softly speaking. Trzaskowski is rather recognized as the symbol of the catastrophe with the saline treatment plant in Warsaw and many others, things like that. So the best agenda presented to the public as far as the candidates is concerned is for all the anti-peace candidates that I am the best anti-peace, anti-law and justice. This is the main message. While the presidential message, transatlantic relations, Trimarium, and of course the internal politics symbolized by the social subsidies for the population, and to maintain that gains. And I have to repeat, this is convincing, each message is convincing for the core electorate of each camps, but it is not very instrumental to change the balance of power.
Vielen Dank.
One more thing. I would like to ask or to point on the fact that all the candidates in Polish presidential elections are pro-European. The only difference is that the vision of the future of the European integration is different. And please remember that in democracy, we have no alternative program. If you are not the supporter of that, you are not the opposition, but you are the enemy. No, it's not like that.
Thank you. Adam, I would like that it would be good to have the next question, and then Fritz is answering both for that question which we had and the following to it. Okay?
Okay.
Who is the next?
The floor is yours.
Yeah. Who is it?
It's Vít Dostal.
Dostal. Okay. Vít.
Hello, good afternoon. My question is not related to the presidential elections directly, but as we have two, or if I include Adam, also three great experts on the Polish European policy, I would like to ask about the new EU Recovery Fund, because there are some estimations saying that Poland might be among net contributors to the fund. We still do not know what is the final shape of the Commission proposal. But if that happens, what do you think? What kind of a reaction could we have from Poland on that?
Thank you, Fritz.
That's an interesting question, and actually something I've been dealing with recently. I've been making a lot of phone calls today and yesterday to find out what the Polish reactions to that might be. And it's difficult, it's complicated, because there is not many official statements by Polish politicians so far, which is weird, but which too says a lot about the internal Polish debate and to what extent European issues are reproduced in Poland. I think what you just said is related to those estimates from that economic institute in Mannheim, and you're right. If that will come true, that will be the outcome of the deal. It would be a disaster for Poland in terms of who gives money and who receives money. I think, and you know, I'm saying that after talking to some people in Warsaw today and yesterday, that Poland, actually the Polish government, is supportive to the plan. So Poland's not taking part in that frugal four revolution against the Merkel-Macron plan. But Polish government skeptical. So Poland is supportive as long as it won't be that hurtful for Poland.
Okay, is there another answer? Yeah, Professor?
I think that the problem is even more serious. To simplify the question, the real question is whether the first economy in the European Union, that means the German economy, is able to effectively to help the second large economy, that means the French one, the third one economy, that means the Italian one, and the fourth large economy, that means the Spanish one. I think there are no such money in the European Union. So the problem is not how to distribute the money, because we have not them at our disposal. The other question is about the political consent of the electorate, both German and smaller states like Scandinavians or the Dutch or Austrians. Then we have the problem of the public aid in the European Union. Everybody asked the Commission, for obvious reasons, to suspend the restrictions about public aid, but the result is then 56% of the donations are the German donation for German enterprises, 18% French, and so on, because nobody is able to compete with German or French budget. Yeah, so the restrictions were not introduced just for fun, but because there was a good reason. Now the coronavirus changed the situation, so we have multi-dimensional challenge. I think Nobel Prize should be won by the man who will find the solution. The problem is how to combine the economic dimension with the political one, because all the governments have their electorates, and if you meet the demands of the South, you will provoke the rebellion in the North and vice versa. In that sense, we have another dimension in Eastern Europe already described. I mean, there will be no consent for being netto payer for the sovereigns. And I think that is the most important challenge in the European Union now. Without any ideological background, it should be tackled, because it's a real hard financial challenge about the core issue of the European integration. That means the common market and the nature of its functioning. This is completely ignored in public debate now, because it's very complicated economic problem, very difficult to be presented during electorate campaign, whatever the country is in the election period. But this is the core question, I think.
Thank you very much.
And if
we
I may
are
jump
going
in.
to come to the last minutes, and I would like to ask Maria to finalize her position.
No, I just wanted to briefly jump in and say that there was an interview with Mateusz Morawiecki in FATS, I think Frankfurter Allgemeine yesterday, and here thank you very much to Mr. Jacek Lepiasz, who did a very nice summary of that of that article. Thank you. But there he also answers this sort of questions. What about Europe and Corona after coronavirus? And he says he warns against Europe of various speeds, and he says the support should be flexible and different for countries that are with economies based on tourism, different with industry, and different for post-communist countries, as he calls it. So yeah, I hope this article is available in German, but also partially in Polish, I guess, sometimes. So you can get the first-hand experience from FATS this week.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues, if I may to suggest that we go on for 5 more minutes for the sake of discussion. I know the time is up.
Is there another one who will raise his hands?
Yes,
perhaps we can collect. I've been trying to raise hand for some time, but I'm sure there are others. So very quickly, just to shoot the question, and thank you for speakers to participate. Professor, I was going to ask you a question, but you already took a lot of time. So let me just say that I have 2 questions. One is German-Polish relations, the impact if one of the opposition candidates would be elected, and I'm thinking especially about those who have a chance to go to the runoff, which is Trzaskowski and Hołownia. Second question is about long overdue generation change in Polish politics. The interesting thing is here that none of the frontrunners is older than 50 years, including the incumbent president Andrzej Duda. And we point this out in our analysis with Adam Traczyk that was published by DGAP just yesterday, that this is not only a Polish phenomenon, it's a regional phenomenon. You can see it throughout Central Eastern Europe and throughout Europe. Look at the whole succession story in German political parties. My question is about the following. It seems that this card of youth and fresh sort of faces is now played against peace, but peace played this card 5 years ago with Duda, who challenged successfully the incumbent president and who was also not the leader of the party. And I'm just trying to ask Maria and Philipp if you feel a sentiment for change that could play for whoever is in the runoff against Duda, and if you see this as this generation card as an important one for the future of Polish politics.
Is there another question there? So we conclude with these answers. I think, Maria, you should start, and then Professor Zurawski and Herr Fritz will conclude it.
I think it's a very interesting observation that there indeed is, well, all candidates are young, but I would twist it and say, well, they're still all male. And if we wanted to have a real change in politics, we should maybe look at Slovakia, I mean, and your president, President Čaputová, which is a really change of quality in politics. What I think is a change for Poland is, again, Robert Biedroń, and the fact that an openly gay former LGBT activist is running fully open in a public sphere, and it is a change, I think. Mental change, that it's not as such a big issue as it was 10, 20 years ago. But yeah, but I see it that in that sense, yes, there is a generational change, but not much diversity change. But these are the times. Let's look at the US, when we have 70-year-olds competing for the highest office in the country. So maybe Poland actually is progressing more in more diversity and generational change in politics.
Thank you. Professor Zurawski?
I think that the victory of the incumbent president means the continuation to changes, while the victory of any of the candidates of the opposition means to come back to the situation before 2015, but even more intensive. So it's rather not vote for changes, but vote for retreat to the previous positions. And this is the main characteristic. As far as Polish-German relations are concerned, I would like to remind you that in Polish constitutional system, the president, in fact, has not a lot of power. Yeah, so he has much more negative power. He can block this or that decision, rather push through his own policy. So if the oppositional candidate wins the elections, it would mean rather 3 years of chaos in Polish internal politics by blocking any new legislative initiatives of the government. Then the starting point of the new policy of the state, because this is not the power of the president to start it. Please remember the position of President Kaczynski when he was the president and Donald Tusk was the prime minister. That will be the more or less the position of the president in this cohabitation system, which is not a Polish tradition and which proved not to work very well in previous years.
There's not so long tradition in that questions. It could be a balance of power, but that's is not final debate. Mr. Fritz, can you continue, please?
I agree with Maria. I think that age is not that important within the presidential campaign. I think that Trzaskowski is close to 50, if I'm not wrong. He's 48 or 49, although he looks younger. He's got that boyish aura, but he's not that young man anymore. But all candidates, and Duda too, they're far from Biden or Trump. So they're all not that age. They're all quite close to one another. So I think age is not really a question here. Talking about Polish-German relations related to all the candidates or a possible new Polish president. I mean, first of all, Polish-German elections are not bad at the moment. Sometimes one might think they're bad because of certain issues like Nord Stream 2 or all the talk about reparations, war reparations, and so on and so forth. But there is intense cooperation between German ministries, German diplomats, and so on and so forth. The tone, the vibe, the sound sometimes is different. And I think a new Polish president, someone who's not Duda, might change that. Trzaskowski and Biedron might change that fundamentally, although I gotta have to say that Duda's relationship with German President Steinmeier is very warm too. Steinmeier and his wife have good relations too, always got along very well with Duda's wife, who speaks German. So it's all not that bad, but there is, let's say, there is some space for serious improvement here. And I think Biedron and Trzaskowski might change the tone a little.
Thank you very much. We neglected surrounding issues to take part and to integrate the nomination of the new judge of the highest court and other things who are connected with the whole field. And so it is clear that we have a limited time, we have a limited issue to discuss it. I will thank you all for your participation, especially the speakers, but all others too. Hopefully we will meet next time with the Gesprächskreis really in personal meetings and shaking hands and having personal contacts. I wish you all a good holiday time and hopefully we will have then an interesting result in Poland. I know that different persons have different hopes as usual with elections, and we will continue to deal with Poland not only but also with the European challenge, which is our common one. Thank you very much. Have a good time. Good evening. We close the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.